365 or 368 or 366. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and for the next hour or so, well, I know I'm late, but we are going to be, as I look at my imaginary watch, we are going to be discussing, this is our live stream lecture. Every Friday and Saturday, we have our Q&A, Ask Me Anything about history and social studies, and then on Sundays, we have our live stream lecture, and today's topic is the impact of the Protestant Reformation on culture and history. So we will be talking about the legacy and the impact of of those events in the 16th century that started with Martin Luther and the shift towards Protestantism and what that meant and how it's intertwined with the Renaissance and how it became an extremely important feature, a facet not just of Christian history, but of all history, and how it influenced the Western world. As I look for an appropriate image in the background, using a background today to give you a nice feel and vibe for the lecture. Let me see here. Okay. There's a lot of images I could use, but I'm looking for one of Luther and the Protestant Reformation. So, here I go. There's a lot of images on this. All right, so we'll start with that. That is Pope Leo X, the Catholic Pope at the time of Martin Luther, who condemned Martin Luther as a heretic. And yes, if you do not want to be condemned as a heretic, but want to become a friendly neighborhood historian, it's as easy as liking and subscribing. So consider doing that and join me and Pope Leo as we do our live stream lecture discussing the history of and the impact and legacy of a Protestant Reformation. I've done a live stream lecture on the Reformation itself, but today we're doing just a discussion of its impact and legacy. Harry is here to hold down the chat. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy history and social studies and everything, and maybe at the end we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. I don't know, we're already running late, so let's see what's going on. What's in Luther just wants the Catholic Church to reform, not actually set up his own form of Christianity. So yes, I've talked about this before on the channel discussing the Protestant Reformation. I have a full-length video you guys can go and check out and enjoy concerning the Protestant Reformation. But basically, for Luther and for Martin Luther and the early reformers, there was this idea of fixing the Roman Catholic Church, of bringing it back to its original origins, because the church had become somewhat corrupt in the 15th century and the early 15th century and 16th century. And because of this long corruption, there was a time when there were two popes, one in Avignon in France and one in Rome. There was a time where popes were extraordinarily corrupt. Popes had lovers and children and things like that. The Borgia family held a significant amount of influence over the papacy in the late 1400s, and the Borgias were known for their corruption and their brutality, basically their engagement in organized crime. Popes and bishops were basically picking people to serve in positions that were close to them. Sometimes they even picked relatives of them. They sold positions in the church. They sold indulgences, basically making that a cash cow for the church. So all of these corruptions eventually led to the Protestant Reformation. And yes, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner. And this is our live stream lecture that we do every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This lecture today will be about the impact of a Protestant Reformation and the legacy of the Protestant Reformation. I've already done a live stream lecture some months ago about the Protestant Reformation itself and what happened during that, so I won't talk too much about that, but check that out. Check out my long-form videos. I have one about the Protestant Reformation. My long-form videos drop every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you like history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing. I'm not going to be interacting with the chat too much, but yes, breaking news that I just read right before I got on. President Biden has been diagnosed after an exam. There was a polyp found and he has prostate cancer. So thoughts, prayers, all of that with him. Hopefully he makes a speedy recovery. Very quickly after his presidency, he's become ill. This hasn't happened a lot with U.S. presidents, especially in the modern time, but hopefully a speedy recovery for the 46th president of the United States. So, Harry, that's partly true, but not fully true. It was at first, but basically the idea of fulfilling through apostolic succession has been part of the church for a long time. So anyways, the Protestant Reformation happens, and Martin Luther pins his 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg. Then it spreads all throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Reformers in Switzerland spread Protestant ideas like Ulrich Zwingli and later John Calvin. King Henry VIII basically breaks with the Church of Rome and so he can get a divorce from his wife, so he can marry Anne Boleyn. The Protestant Reformation takes off in England, and over the next century, we'll go back and forth between different forms of Protestantism as well as Catholicism. The original intention of the Protestant reformers was indeed to get the Catholic Church to become what it was supposed to be. But as time went on, as they became more involved in certain doctrinal disputes, they became more and more theologically independent of the Roman Catholic Church and continued to turn the mirror on the corruptions of the papacy, the selling of seats, the giving away of seats to family members, the constant warfare and political struggles, the wealth of the bishops and the papacy compared to the poverty of the people. All of these things were, so social justice, political reform, ecclesiastical reform, these were huge facets of the Protestant Reformation. And certain leaders and princes in Germany and throughout most of Europe embraced Protestantism as a way to get out from under the yoke of paying taxes and fealty and honor to the papacy and to the Catholic Church. So Protestantism took off really fast. But anyways, what else happened? So the corruption of the church was obviously an extremely significant issue that caused the Protestant Reformation, and as early as the 1520s, the Catholics were already starting to take note of this and seeking to implement what reforms they could. So one of the biggest results of the Protestant Reformation, one of the biggest impacts on the largest branch of Christianity, Catholic Christianity, was the counter-reformation or Catholic Reformation, which really gets going in the 1530s and 40s as the Catholic Church seeks to basically fix all the problems that it's been having for a very long time. Basically, the certain popes, most notably Paul V, or the Paul III, and a couple of others are and Gregory the 11th, I think, are extremely involved in fixing the problems with the Catholic Church, in reforming the Catholic institutions and in reforming the Catholic practices and reaffirming what Catholic beliefs are, how they are different from Protestantism, and what's going on. The most influential and significant of these Catholic leaders and institutions that becomes popular at this time are the Society of Jesus. Basically, the biggest, most important Catholic priestly organization perhaps in all of history were indeed the Jesuits, founded by Ignatius de Loyola from Spain. Basically, he was a general who, during his injuries, supposedly had spiritual visions of God and the Virgin Mary, and was encouraged to start a new order of Catholic priests and leaders, and that became the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. And the Jesuits are extraordinarily important to the Catholic Reformation, because at this time, Spain, the largest Catholic country in Europe, is spreading, or actually the second largest to France, is spreading its influence all throughout the Western world due to its colonization of North and South America, its conquest of the Incas and the Aztecs and other native tribes. And because of that, the Catholic faith is starting to spread in Latin America, and the Jesuits become one of the biggest actors in that field. So this is Ignatius de Loyola, by the way. My smoking jacket's in the back. I can't wear it because it's too hot. But anyways, as time goes on, more and more the Catholic Church is interested in reform, and the Jesuits are the biggest example of priestly reform, a new priestly order dedicated to poverty, dedicated to education, and dedicated to preaching the gospel. They become involved in political escapades all throughout the Eastern and Western world as they seek to influence leaders everywhere. They seek to spread the Catholic faith, and they seek to outdo the Protestants. Because of Ignatius de Loyola and some of his followers, the Catholic faith makes its way to India and to Indonesia, to Malaysia, and China and Japan, especially in the form of the Jesuit priests during the 16th century and into the 17th century. A great example of this is St. Francis Xavier, who is one of Ignatius de Loyola's closest associates, who helped spread the Catholic faith into Japan and Malaysia, as well as India. So the Jesuits are one of the most influential Catholic groups of the time, and they come out in the 16th century with a fury of force as they are trying to thwart Protestant growth, basically countermanding the Catholic losses in Europe with new Protestant areas in England and Germany and the Holy Roman Empire and Switzerland by counterbalancing that by getting Catholic converts in Latin America, North America, and East Asia. So this leads to this is what's yeah, my pleasure. So you've got the biggest impact perhaps of the Reformation and the biggest legacy of the Reformation is the rise of the counter-reformation, where the Catholic Church basically fixes a huge number of its doctrinal issues while also trying to be focused on growth of the church. And the Jesuits help the church grow, better popes help the church grow, and basically try to stop the bleeding in Europe while also influencing other areas of the world more and more. So the spreading of the Catholic faith, despite the Reformation, actually leads to a net growth of Catholics in the world during the 16th century, despite the Protestant Reformation sieving away millions of people in England, Switzerland, the Holy Roman Empire, and even in France. The political instability of Europe is really caused in many ways by the Protestant Reformation. Because of the tensions of it's very uncommon in the 16th century for religion to be separated from politics. In many ways, political leaders have a huge influence on what the people of their land celebrate and which church they embrace. And leaders, because they are seen as being appointed by God, whether they be Protestant or Catholic, are extremely impactful in making sure that their area embraces the faith that they believe in. This is known as Kyrios regio eios religio, he who rules his religion. So King Henry VIII doesn't really embrace Protestantism personally, but makes sure that all of his subjects become Protestant as much as he possibly can, although many of them retain many Catholic traditions and practices throughout the 16th century. When his daughter Mary comes to the throne in the 1550s, she will do everything to bring England back to Catholicism, and her husband, Philip II of France, will do his absolute best with the Spanish Armada to basically not only conquer England, but force them back into the Catholic fold. So politically, the leader of a region, whatever religion he believes in, he or she wields a significant amount of influence on the religious beliefs of their subjects. And this becomes the case in England and in Germany and in France and in Spain. And I keep saying Germany, but it's really the Holy Roman Empire. So what happens next is quite fascinating. The political instability caused because of the Reformation obviously leads to political conflict and to warfare. During the 16th century, both sides, the Protestants and the Catholics, believed it was better to kill the other side than to let them promulgate their ideas. Your soul is eternal. If you die in a state of heresy, you will go to hell. And with both Catholics and Protestants believing the other was in hell, it is better to kill someone than for his ideas to spread to a certain area and more people to believe and more people to go to hell. He's already going to go to hell already, so might as well get him there sooner and keep him from getting his ideas anywhere. That is why Luther, after the Diet of Worms, where he refused to recant his views in front of the Holy Roman Emperor, who was a strong Catholic, and the King of Spain, went into hiding under a prince named Frederick the Wise, and basically tried to pretend that he was a knight and a squire, grew out a beard, did everything he could to keep his profile low in Germany during that time because he was being hunted constantly by the church and by political authorities. In France, the Catholics did everything, many Catholic rulers did everything they could to exterminate Protestants that they believed were dangerous. Reform Protestantism, Calvinism becomes extraordinarily popular. We talked about Calvinism in last week's live stream lecture where I discussed the Dutch Golden Age and the Dutch Revolt, when the Dutch were the most interesting and powerful Western European power in the late 16th century, or throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. The rise of the Dutch, basically. But Calvinism is basically the belief developed by John Calvin in Geneva in Switzerland that God has chosen certain people to be saved and everyone else will be damned. And because of that, you have a commitment to honor God and to prove that you are one of the people he has chosen, known as the elect. Because of this, you are to be an efficient, hardworking, diligent, and moral person, because all of those signs of outside success, wealth, perseverance, and a good work ethic are proof that you are among the saved. And these ideas become extraordinarily popular in Holland, throughout the rest of the Netherlands, and in Switzerland. That's why Swiss watches are actually a result of the Protestant Reformation. Keeping time, managing your time, using your time to the glory of God is a Calvinist tenet, and it becomes extraordinarily popular for the people of Switzerland to monitor their time. And so that's where the Swiss part of the Reformation is the industry that's produced from it. The Dutch become extremely efficient at much of their production, shoes and things like that. Efficient work ethics, mass production, hard work, managing your time properly, leading to the creation of watches and clocks. These are all tenets of Reformation theology practically living out in the real world. So there's industrial concerns, there's political changes, there's constant fighting and warfare because of this, because basically, even if one ruler is allowed to imprint his religion on his subjects, the subjects are still going to resist who are part of the other religious group. And that happens all throughout France. Basically, the French legend and mystique of constant civil wars, political strife, and revolution does not really start with the French Revolution in the 1700s. It starts with the French Wars of Religion. Basically, from 1550 onwards, the French Protestants, who are Calvinists, called Huguenots, constantly are fighting against the French government in one way or another, sometimes gaining the upper hand, sometimes being crushed and suppressed, until eventually King Henry IV, who is a Protestant who embraces Catholicism, makes peace with the Edict of Nantes in 1598. King Louis XIV, his grandson, will undo many of the protections for Protestants, forcing many of the Huguenots to flee to the New World, where they will settle in North and South Carolina in the English colonies, because England is Protestant and French Canada is still obviously Catholic. So there's not many Protestants in France to this day because most of them were forced to flee. French political strife and division rises because of this. The Holy Roman Empire loses considerable amounts of power because of different principalities and rulers and dukes and earls subverting the power of the Holy Roman Emperor because they want to be Protestant, even though the Holy Roman Emperor, as a Habsburg, is a strong Catholic. Obviously, the religious centralized authority of the papacy is deeply undermined by the efforts of the Protestant reformers and Protestant armies and leaders throughout the continent. And obviously in England, until the late 17th century, there will be a continual issue of what happens if England goes back to the Catholic Church, until the British Parliament, as it gains more power, basically bans Catholic monarchs from being able to ascend to the throne, a ban that was only lifted about 10 years ago. Basically, the English Reformation is a fascinating topic that deserves its own live stream lecture. And by the way, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner. This is our live stream lecture every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can hear me talk about a particular historical topic, and today is the impact of the Protestant Reformation. So consider liking and subscribing if you love history. This was recommended by my wonderful subscriber and moderator, Harsonet, so thank you for that. But yes, anyways, so now that we've got all the promo stuff out of the way, the English Reformation basically is a tug of war between not just the Catholics and the Protestants, but between more extreme forms of Protestantism and more liberal forms of Protestantism, with a moderate Anglicanism eventually becoming the dominant Church of England. That church will become the dominant colony in the 13 colonies, dominant religion in the 13 colonies, and that is why many American presidents are Episcopals. Episcopals, or the Episcopalian Church, is the American version of the Church of England, and it becomes the state churches of many different colonies, like Virginia, one of the most populous colonies at the time of the American Revolution and the founding of the country, with 4 of the first 5 presidents being from Virginia. So it has impact on the development of America. It has to impact on the development of politics in England. And basically, the British, in 1688, deposed their king, James II, because they are worried that he will be a Catholic and his son, who is a baptized Catholic and a baby, will eventually become the ruler, and England will be brought back to the Catholic fold. They ask his daughter to overthrow him, and with the help of her husband, the Prince of Orange, in the Netherlands, they overthrow James in what's called the Glorious Revolution. After the Glorious Revolution, England becomes firmly Protestant. Parliament gains much more power and bans Catholic monarchs. So the rise of parliamentary power in England is indirectly caused by the struggles of the Reformation. So the political shifts in the world are huge. Meanwhile, the Jesuits continue to push Catholic influence in Spanish colonies and Portuguese influences in both the West Indies and the East Indies. By the way, the West Indies refers to the Caribbean, the East Indies refers to areas like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Papua New Guinea, all the way down to, I don't think Australia is technically considered part of it, but that's the East Indies versus the West Indies. And it's Indies because of Columbus naming the Native Americans Indians, a people in God, Indios. So, obviously, the Reformation was caused in many ways by the studying of native language, humanist philosophy, and the Renaissance, and the development of, but the Age of Exploration and the development of new colonies in the Western Hemisphere allows for Catholics and Protestants to compete with each other there, with the Catholics, thanks to the Jesuit Society, gaining a foothold. So the Counter-Reformation really kicks up in the 1540s. You have the Jesuits educating Catholic preachers and leaders everywhere. You have the Council of Trent organized, which gets rid of the simony, which is the selling of church offices, and the nepotism, where relatives of certain bishops and leaders would be put in high-ranking religious positions despite having no formal training, no allegiance to Catholicism, and despite being ravenous sinners quite often. So for 18 years, the Council of Trent meets from 1545 to 1563, and during that time, they basically explain why they don't believe in any of the Protestant doctrines, like being saved by faith alone, through grace alone, through Jesus Christ alone, why they don't believe that the Bible is the only authority, another Protestant claim, why they deny predestination according to the Calvinist lens, what books are in the Bible. Luther had removed 7 books from the Catholic text based on Jewish authorities, and so on. So while there are theological reforms, there are ecclesiastical reforms, there's a banning of simony and nepotism. By the way, the term nepotism comes from the fact that bishops would often pick their nephews to be in a role that they weren't qualified for, just so that their family would become more influential in the church. But church and state, as I've mentioned before, and as you've probably figured out, are extremely close together. So the more influence you have in the church, the more wealth and power you have in the country itself. So those are all examples of a legacy and impact of what was I going to say? These are all impacts and legacies of the Reformation, directly or indirectly. The printing press, we talked about industry, is obviously the main reason the Protestant Reformation survives. Contrary to what many Protestant Christians like to believe to this day, the Protestant Reformation does not survive because its ideas are so groundbreaking and so incredible. Many Christians throughout the centuries had views that were similar to these, or some sort of amalgamation of them and the Roman Catholic views. Many Catholic saints had developed certain views on predestination that were similar to John Calvin, including one of the most famous saints in all of church history, Augustine. So it's not like these things were brand spanking new and came out of nowhere. They were codified in a new way that was quite interesting. But you also have the printing press becoming the main tool. The printing press, created in 1447 by Johannes Gutenberg, obviously is a way for Protestant ideas to be printed, not just in Latin, but in the native languages of the people, the vernacular, so English, French, German and Italian and Spanish, and that allows these ideas to be disseminated a lot quicker, as well as the ideas of the ancient philosophers, church fathers, the scriptures, obviously. All of these things are printed a lot quicker and are much more accessible to the people. Getting the Bible in the hands of the people is a huge Protestant aim, and thanks to the printing press, it no longer costs a year's salary to buy a Bible and have it in your home. But the vast majority of citizens can, many of whom are peasants and serfs to some extent or another, cannot read or write. So how are they going to get access to understanding the Bible? Well, the best way that actually happens is that the Bible is translated into their language. So if they can read and write, they can read it in their own language. They don't have to know Latin to understand and access the Bible. At the same time, obviously, they need to learn how to read and write. So as the Jesuits are educating a new generation of Catholic leaders and prelates, the Protestants likewise start to do this on a much more casual base. So Geneva, the home of John Calvin and many of the strong Reformed views of a Protestant Reformation, becomes a center for education. Centers for learning become much more common. Universities are commandeered, originally formed by Catholics, are commandeered by Protestants to teach people how to read and write. Schools open much more. Men and women are elevated in the ways they are educated and are able to access texts so that they can read the Bible and understand it. So critical thinking, logic, history, these things all become much more important, along with the individual study for devotional and educational purposes of the Bible itself. The first English Bible, the Great Bible, is sanctioned by the King of England in Henry VIII, is released in 1539. William Tyndale had already completed a translation of the Bible. The Catholic Church, to its credit, had already been translating Bibles into vernacular languages even before Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Luther himself created a German translation of the New Testament based on the works of the Dutch scholar Erasmus. So this is part of the Renaissance influencing the Reformation influencing the world at that time. You have a higher view of education because you have a much better ability to print manuscripts and text in your own language or in Latin, and therefore you have much more access to the citizenry and a much higher need for that citizenry to be able to read and write, and if they can, read and write in Latin. So This leads to the printing and translation of various different Bibles. The Vulgate, which is the Latin Bible that had been the Bible of the Church for 1,000 years in the West, loses its predominance. By 1611, obviously, in England, the King James Bible is purchased, and that becomes the gold standard of Bibles, not just in England, but in the Western world. So easy access to the Bible, easy access to ancient texts are at least part of the Reformation's legacy and impact on the world. You don't have the works of Shakespeare, you don't have the works of Milton, you don't have the works of many of the great English writers of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries without access to a Bible in their own translation or ready access to the Bible even in Latin. So Shakespeare, for instance, did not come from an extremely wealthy, well-educated, or noble class, but he was still able to access educational features that became more and more common as the Renaissance and Reformation persisted. The need for educating women also increased as women were seen as more and more independent as men, not necessarily politically equal, but spiritually equal to men in many circumstances. To be fair, these thoughts and ideas had already been happening thanks to the Renaissance's emphasis on humanist studies, the study of the human being, meaning both male and female. That became even more the case with the Protestant Reformation, as women who were now able to have a stronger role in the church, whereas in Catholicism they were more restricted. And obviously you can see the impact of this today with most of the Protestant denominations, such as the Episcopals or the Methodists, being okay with women clergy, whereas the Catholic Church still does not allow females even in their diaconate, let alone the priesthood. So these are all examples of impact sociologically, economically. They're all connected. This is what I love about history, the interconnectedness of history. You want to build watches and clocks because you want to be able to understand how time works and use your time to glorify God, because as a Calvinist, you believe that if you glorify God properly, you must be amongst the saved. This is not to say that Catholics did not show any ingenuity or creativity. The Renaissance had huge impact and started in Catholic Europe before the Reformation. So higher education, more access to education, more studies of ancient texts, translations in the vernacular, using the printing press to its best advantage is all part of the Catholic repertoire of the late 15th century. The sluggishness and laziness of the church leadership, and especially the papacy, the corruption therein, had halted progress that the Renaissance sought to bring about. Many Renaissance scholars and philosophers, such as Erasmus, who I mentioned already, were very keen on the corruption of the church and felt that they should try to reform it from within. Luther started off this way and eventually realized after the Diet of Worms that this was hopeless based on his theological convictions. So as the 16th century goes on, divisions continue to grow between Catholics and Protestants. Wars are breaking out. The French have 5 or 6 wars of religion, civil wars, civil strife throughout the 16th century, as the Protestants continue to be hammered by the Queen Regent, Catherine de' Medici, throughout the 1560s and 1570s, who basically rules France almost completely independently as the ruler there. In England, the Marian reforms that led to her being called Bloody Mary and the persecution of the Protestants are surmounted by Elizabeth's persecution of Catholics. Her reign is just much longer. And the extreme Reformation ideas of her brother Edward are abandoned during her reign as England becomes a moderate Protestant country. In Germany, despite the advance of Lutheranism in Germany and the Nordic countries and Scandinavia, the Catholics hold strong in certain areas, which is why Bavaria to this day is a very strong Catholic province in Germany, but certain other parts of Germany are predominantly Lutheran and Protestant. Spain and Portugal do not experience the Reformation, and because they are the hotbed of the Jesuits, they are the keys to mass conversions of natives in North and South America and natives in the East Indies all the way to Japan until the Japanese government bans them in the early 1600s. The Dutch, which we talked about last week, break away from the Spanish because of this. The no Protestant community wants to chafe under Catholic leadership, and that causes the 80 Years' War. In 1618, the Bohemians, seeking to break away from the Catholic holds of and the Bohemians are the Czechs, by the way, are seeking to break away from the hold of the Catholic Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburgs. They throw out emissaries out of a window. This causes the 30 Years' War, the last major religious war in Europe. And believe me, there have been dozens in England and France and the Holy Roman Empire for over a century now, since the Reformation had started. The 30 Years' War will bring Protestant powers such as Denmark and Sweden fighting in the middle of Germany between the Catholic Habsburgs. Eventually, the French will get involved for their own, even though they are Catholic, and that will make it a more political war than religious war. So divisions between Catholics and Protestants are only exacerbated throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. At the same time, and eventually by the mid-17th centuries, the decision is, well, we all think they're going to hell, but we can't keep killing each other or we will depopulate all of Europe. So they basically just decide to settle with whoever is ruling can figure out their religion, and a nation-state system is created where you have the people of an area having their own nation, and it's much less religious and much more political. And from then on, the influence of religion will slowly deteriorate in most of the political structures of Western and Central Europe, because people are more concerned with their political investments than their religious ones at the time. The interest in ingenuity and creativity will spark a renewed interest in science and studying the world of God. That goes hand in hand with the humanism of the Renaissance. This will eventually lead to huge breakthroughs in science and the scientific revolution of the 17th century, which influences the Enlightenment of the 18th. So all of these things are somewhat connected to each other. The decentralization of religious power in Europe only leads to an increased secularization of the society, at least on the political front, and then later on the cultural front, which is why Europe is not extraordinarily religious to this day. This is obviously not the intention of any of the Protestant reformers or Catholic leaders of the time, but is an indirect result of what happened in the 17th and 16th century, just like all history is a result of what happened in previous centuries. Our world today is a result of history that more directly happened recently, but also more indirectly happened in the past. So, let me see, what else? Let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, yes. One more thing that's quite important. Protestants are not just divided against Catholics, they grow more and more increasingly divided against each other, where basically there is a feeling that amongst Protestants that other Protestants are going to hell and deserve to be persecuted by the state so that their ideas cannot be promulgated. The Catholic Church uses their own church trials and tribunals to persecute Protestants, Jews, and others who they believe subvert them, and this is very popular in Spain, and this is obviously the Inquisition, which started during the 1400s, but is ramped up during the Reformation, obviously. But the Protestants' division amongst themselves continues to grow. You have Lutherans, you have Anglicans, you have Calvinists and Huguenots, you have Reformed groups that will follow Calvin's model. In Scotland, they will become the Presbyterians, for instance. You also have a group called the Anabaptists, which are a fringe extreme group that some of that are basically pacifists who do not believe in infant baptism, which is something that all Christians had believed in up to that point. They are heavily persecuted, not just by Catholics, but by Lutherans and Calvinists as well. So the continual persecution and infighting amongst the Protestants leads to a level of division that will basically keep them from being a united front against the Catholics. And because of this, in Luther's opinion and that of many other Protestant historians and scholars, it keeps Europe from becoming fully Protestant and unseating the Catholic Church as the dominant force, because the Protestants could not unite into one sect like the Catholics were. They chose denominations that exist to this day: the Methodists, the Presbyterians, Episcopals, and such. That is why Protestantism. That is why there's many different forms of Protestant Christianity to this day. A lack of unity created because of religious infighting in the 16th century prevented them from supplanting the Catholic Church in its dominance over Europe. So, what else can I speak of? I've spoken of the political, social, religious, educational, economic impact of Reformation. These are the lasting legacies of that. Yes, the Great Awakening is an example of that. Those are Protestant preachers in North America. Obviously, the colonies are going to be significantly impacted. The reason the Latin world is so heavily Catholic to this day is because of the aforementioned Jesuits and them spreading the Catholic gospel during the 16th century in Mexico, Central America, and South America. Canada will have divisions between French Catholics and English Protestants. The 13 colonies are heavily started by Protestants, although Catholics fleeing persecution in England go to and start their own colony that they name after Mary, the mother of Jesus. Maryland is named after them. But overall, America has a Protestant history because it is founded by English settlers who were, many of them, heavily influenced by Protestantism. The Calvinist pilgrims settled at Plymouth and had the first Thanksgiving with the Native Americans. I have an entire live stream lecture on that. Go back to the day before Thanksgiving of last year and check that out if you would like. Yes. And yes, Talia is absolutely right. That leads to the creation of the WASP people, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which have been the predominant force in America politically and socially since the 1600s. So anyways, meanwhile, the influence of the Portuguese and the Jesuits in the East will not be as formidable, with conversions and permanent religious inclusion and I don't know what else to say, tenacity, I guess you could say, standing in places like Japan, China, India, and Malaysia. Although there are significant Catholic communities that come out of this, the native governments of those areas are suspicious of foreigners, and this leads to the suppression of different Christian groups, particularly the Jesuits, who are banned from many different countries and develop a reputation not just for their religious involvement, but for their political involvement and sometimes their political over-involvement, making the Jesuits to this day one of the easiest targets of conspiracy theories and one of the most controversial Roman Catholic religious groups in its history. And that's a history that stretched thousands of years. So basically, the Council of Trent allows the Catholic Church to set up its own to reaffirm its religious doctrines. It establishes the Catholics as having more books in their Bible than the Protestants do, and it encourages art. So the Renaissance art that was extremely influential in Catholic architecture and painting during the 15th and 16th centuries, with Michelangelo, Leonardo, and the like all being Catholics and being patrons for the Catholics, that religious art will become extraordinarily important in pressing the Catholic message against the Protestants during the 16th and 17th centuries, with the development of a new stream of art called the Baroque, or it's basically counter-reformation art. Great artists like Caravaggio are an example of this, as he prints some of the most beautiful, telling, and graphic religious imagery of the time and had ever been seen before. And so religious artists like this are used by the Catholic Church to show the beauty of their religion and also to make subtle jabs at Protestants and those who do not believe in the Catholic faith. Peter Paul Rubens, people like that. If you look up some of their art, it's beautiful, it's engaging, it's eclectic, it's real. It shows the human influence from the Renaissance and the need to study the human condition and the human body and all of its assets and features, but also to show the religious superiority of the Catholic Church. Beautiful art speaks to the human soul in the Catholic mind instead of the 16th century. So using art as a weapon of this religious war becomes a facet of the Catholic Church. Music also becomes extraordinarily important at this time, and this leads to the development of the forefathers of classical music, with people like Palestrina and Johann Sebastian Bach becoming huge Catholic influencers of religious art and music. Basically using that as a tool to show, once again, the beauty and superiority of the Roman Catholic position. So music and art are heavily influenced by this. The Baroque and counter-reformation art and literature and religion and music is extraordinarily influential. Germany becomes the big battleground for that, as you've noticed by me mentioning Bach and Peter Rubens. These are Germans. What else? I'm glad you found it too. There's one more thing I want to mention. Oh yes, Protestant art, meanwhile, the art of a Protestant Reformation influences the art that trickles down into today's world. More secular themes, more focus on just the human experience, living in cities, living in towns, what you eat, a focus on the human soul, a focus on the human as an individual, because part of the Protestant Reformation, a huge ethos of it theologically, is individual salvation by grace through faith. You have an individual responsibility to believe in God. You are not part of a larger, you are part of a larger picture called the church, and a particular denomination, but the church is not responsible for your salvation. You are responsible for your salvation. So because of this individualism in Christianity, which allows for division, as one religious leader says, hey, I don't like this interpretation, so I'm going to start this church. And that's how you get different Protestant churches forming over time. However, the benefit to this is that art starts to be focused much more on the individual, as the theological has become more individualistic as well. So that's why some of the most famous Protestant artists produce some of the most famous individualistic imagery that is secular. Peter Bruegel. I talked about a lot of them. Many of them are Dutch. Peter Bruegel, Van Dyck, Van Eyck, Jan Vermeer. Obviously, the girl with a pearl earring is not explicitly religious. The paintings of fruit bowls, the paintings of people living in their homes, the paintings of landscape portraiture becomes popular because of this. It's a celebration of God's world and God's highest creation, humanity. It's not to say that Catholics do not engage in this as well, but for Protestants, there's a much more individualistic theme to their, not only their creation of their ecclesiastical orders in different denominations, but also to individual salvation. So focus on the individual becomes extremely important, and focus on secular scenes becomes much more important for the Dutch masters and English artists of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So that is why Rembrandt becomes Rembrandt, basically, with most of his, some of his work is religious, but most of his work is purely secular, but it all has religious themes and undertones in it as well. So these are a few of the things that are going on in the artistic world. You have the Catholics doubling down on the religious art. You have the Protestants embracing secular art, embracing humanism in their art, and embracing the individual as the highest point of salvation. Interestingly enough, the individualistic nature of the West, in particularly the United States, may very well be a result, the political self-consciousness of the individual, of individualism, may be an indirect or more direct result of the Protestant Reformation. Because you have an individual interest in your salvation, you might have an individual interest in your work, you might have an individual interest in your basic human rights, and an individual interest in what you can own, how you can vote, and what happens to you. So your rulers aren't just assigned by God. Just like you have an individual stake in your government, in your politics, in your economy, in your social life. It's not to say that no one was individualistic before Protestantism. Protestantism brings up much more individualistic themes. It's no coincidence that America, a predominantly Protestant country, especially in its founding, is also a predominantly individualistic country, especially in its founding. So whatever problems you may have with America, or love you have for America, whatever you think of America, a huge part of the individualistic fervor that continues to run through the veins of most Americans, which makes them politically more libertarian in many ways than their European counterparts, is because of the strong influence of the Protestant Reformation. So I hope you guys see that that's a lot of the impact of history going on there, where the political foundations and experience of the American person as an individual in highlighting the importance of the individual comes partly from a Protestant ethos that looks at an individual's individual relationship with God and with humanity, which obviously includes all facets of humanity, including governance, economic productivity, and all of those things. So, anyways, it's a lot. It's a lot to get through, but I think that's generally it. I've talked about the art, I've talked about the social, the political, the economic, all of these things that are influenced. In many ways, you do not have the modern world without the Protestant Reformation. It is impossible to think of Christianity without thinking of Protestantism. If any of you are Christians, you are or have an association with Christianity, you are more likely than not, if you are an American, have it through Protestantism, although Catholicism has grown significantly as the United States has brought on immigrants from Italy, Ireland, and Latin America, and other areas. So, to this day, Catholicism remains the largest strain of Christianity. Islam is slightly larger than that as an overall religion. Orthodox Christianity in the East doesn't really see the Protestant Reformation, by the way, as a big deal. They just think it's the Catholics fighting with themselves. And although they have some general appreciation for the Protestants undermining and rejecting the authority of the Pope and of Catholic councils, they themselves eventually become very, very turned off by many Protestant ideas of individualism, individual salvation, grace through faith, the Bible alone being authority. They see that as a contradiction of their own religious and ecclesiological positions. So if you've ever wondered what do the Eastern Orthodox think about this development in Christianity, that's generally where they come out. And History Matters has a great video discussing how they react to the Catholic Reformation and the Protestant Reformation. So basically, this live stream lecture, in a way, was a lecture on the Counter-Reformation, but also on the impact of Protestantism on Catholicism and the rest of the world. So, but basically, Protestantism remains an extremely huge part of Christianity and is the newest form of Christianity to some extent, and has developed and divided many different times into many different groups. So non-denominational Christianity is an extension of Protestantism, though it claims to not have a denominational spirit to it. So, the overall number of Christians in the world, I think, is just over 2 billion, 2.2 or 2.3 billion, and that includes Orthodox Christians. There's about 500 million, and then Protestants, there's maybe another 300 or 400 million there. And Orthodox Christians there's a lot of them because Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Greece, the Balkans, there's a lot of Orthodox Christians who are culturally affiliated there. So, anyways, that is a general summation of the impact and legacy of the Protestant Reformation. I hope you enjoyed me telling you about it. And consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. And we've got about 15 minutes left in the lecture, so I will take that time to answer any questions you have regarding the Protestant Reformation or anything regarding history or social studies, what we do every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I really appreciate you guys listening and tuning in. It means a lot. Consider, again, liking and subscribing, but also becoming a member. You get special perks, access early, your own videos, stuff like that. We're going to be working on what it means to be a member throughout this week. Check out long-form content that drops every Friday and Monday, including my most recent video where I take on my own hot takes and explain why I have those particular historical perspectives. So thank you very much for joining us. I will be on for the next 15 minutes to answer all of your questions related to history and social studies, and I'll be looking at the chat more in depth there. You're very welcome, Hell Screams, and in no way affiliated. Dan, I appreciate that. What is your guess on how many of those approximate 2.2 billion Christians are practicing? It all depends how you define practicing. There are cultural Christians who obviously see 96, think of themselves as Christian but don't really practice. There are people, and that's a spectrum. There's people who are culturally and ethnically identified as Christian because that's what it means to be a Christian. That's what it means to be part of your people group and part of your social circle. There are people who are occasionally practicing, people who consider themselves to be Christian but don't really practice, and people who are obviously very, very devout. I do not know Alpha Kenny. Are you referring, is that from South Park? I read Candide. Is it true that if you want to trade with Japan, you have to step on the cross crucifix? Yes, that was a common practice then. The Japanese actually persecuted Catholic Christians, crucifying them to basically make a mockery of the crucifix and the crucifixion of Jesus. Yes, Sami, that is. And you read Candide by Voltaire. You're very well read. Will, hello. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. When do you think the British Empire started its decline, and when do you think the empire ended? The British Empire technically ended 1997 or 8. I think it's 98, when they gave Hong Kong back to the Chinese. But the British Empire, I think its real decline comes after the First World War, when the colonies start clamoring. You have these national congresses and things like that, and there's definitely some sensitivity, despite the British having more influence than ever in the Middle East after the fall of the Ottomans in the 1920s. And the Catholics did try to control the Japanese Silk Trade. It didn't get too far. Where do your rights come from? So, Raphael, that's an interesting question, and that has exactly to do with what we were just talking about in the lecture. Many would say your rights come from God. That's what Catholics and Christians generally tend to believe. But rights come from, I don't share my religious perspectives, Ali. I've said it before, I've admitted it, I believe there's a God, but I don't share which God I believe in or how I believe in him, her, or it. So there you go. But some people believe your rights come from the state. Some people believe, as John Locke will explain, that rights just come from nature and they're just there because you have them. Regardless of religious affiliation or not, you can believe in individual rights just being part of who someone is, which is a huge part of classical liberalism and libertarianism. So, thoughts on India versus Pakistan. Do you believe Pakistan government supports terrorists? There has been some supporting of that, but not by the entire government. I don't know enough to actually say about that, but it looks like, and hopefully that ceasefire will hold through and India and Pakistan will stop fighting. Can you make me like Harry Brandon, like there's a wrench? Huh? I don't know what you mean, but I like Harry. Who wouldn't like Harry? The Portuguese and Dutch were in Japan in the 1600s. The Dutch were the only ones allowed in there afterwards, Talia. You know a lot about history. I've been seeing some of your comments. Thank you for sharing that. Were there any Dutch Catholics, and where did they live? There were Dutch Catholics. They were in what is called, there were some in the regular Netherlands, but most of them lived in the southern provinces, which are called which were called the Spanish Netherlands, and later the Austrians took them, so it was called the Austrian Netherlands, and then eventually that becomes Belgium in the 19th century. Raphael, which question did I dodge? Am I a sophist? I wouldn't necessarily call myself a sophist. Sophistry is the ancient Greek belief in basically some sort of moral relativism. Tataria. What is Tataria? I'm from the United States. I don't say much more about that. June 1st, 1997. Yes, Hong Kong went back to the Chinese, and that's considered the end of the British Empire. You also gave back the Stone of Scone around that time to the Scottish, basically assenting to their right for their own independence. So, hello, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Let me see here, whatever questions. I'm going through the chat to see what questions I've got. A German Muslim, C96, that's really cool. Difference with Islam and Christianity is the fact that there was no witnesses to Muhammad getting revelation, whereas Christ had many. Christ didn't get revelation. There are many differences between Christianity and Islam in those particularities, Billy. Sami, hello. Isabella of Spain started the Inquisition after the Reconquista and expelling of Jews. Absolutely true. Are Syrian people Muslim? Most of them are. The vast majority of Syrians are Muslim. India almost beat Pakistan, but the USA, Donald Trump said for ceasefire. Yes, that is true. What you would have had is you would have had, for the first time in history, 2 confirmed nuclear powers having a hot war, a land war. Parts of the Netherlands and South parts is still Catholic, yes. And that's closer to the Austrian and Spanish Netherlands, which were controlled by the Habsburgs for an extremely long time, Talia. That's why that's the case. Let me see here. Where is any witness to Christ's existence outside the Bible? So there's the Tacitus and Josephus both attest to the existence of Christ. Christian sources do attest to the existence of Muhammad, but they do not name him specifically. Yes, that's fair. Cosmic is saying, have you read about the volcanic eruption of 536? Curious about the ecological collapse that followed. Don't know a lot about that one. 536 is considered one of the worst years because of that. Was that at Vesuvius? Was that another like mini Pompeii? I'm not sure. I mean, Scotland still isn't allowed a referendum on independence without the British Prime Minister's consent, and they can't receive independence until Westminster signs off on it. Yeah, but you're willing to grant it, and they're not willing to get it yet, so. Neither one of those were contemporaries. They were alive at the same time as many of Jesus' followers, and if Jesus had lived to old age, then yes, they would have been contemporaries. They were writing in the 1st century. And you have St. Paul in his writings attesting to these Christian doctrines 20 years after the supposed death of Jesus. They refer to a man who lived in that area and had followers. They did not physically see him, but then they were writing later. But that's not hearsay. That's not exactly hearsay. They knew of a particular group of people that followed a particular man. They attested to that man existing and to him having followers. Yes, there were many different major religions at the time. That's because it was an extremely polytheistic and diverse religious society in the Roman Empire. We won't grant it, and if we did, it would be on the very beneficial grounds. Fair enough. Josephus is one of the ones who wrote about him. So one of the biggest historically ignorant things someone can say to me is that Jesus did not exist. That just shows a religious bias to me rather than an actual understanding of history. You don't have to be a Christian to say Jesus existed. Jews, Muslims don't say that he existed and have a lot of good things to say about him, and they're clearly not Christians. It doesn't show any sort of religious belief, and there are many atheists who admit that Jesus indeed existed and had teachings that were promulgated by his followers, and the attestations of Jesus' existence, both from internal and external sources, are better than any other ancient figure in history. Yeah, Nubs, is there any attestation that Plato lived, or Socrates, or by all ancient standards, Jesus has more evidence for his existence than any other ancient historical standard other than maybe Julius Caesar, just by writing alone. Is there proof that, Nubs, is there proof that Julius Caesar existed? Is there proof that, is there proof that Muhammad existed. I'm not arguing for a religious perspective. I'm just saying that there's evidence that he existed. There's strong evidence that he existed, and all indications are that he did indeed exist. He supposedly died on the cross, and his followers said that he rose from the dead. That didn't just come out of nowhere. Interesting, Harry. Thank you for sharing that about Scotland. But Nubs, is there evidence that Socrates existed? Where is the evidence that Socrates existed? Or Buddha? Or any ancient figure? Like direct evidence. It's very hard to have that, especially with writing. Jesus lives near the end of the ancient period. He lives in the Roman Empire when it's at the height of its power. It's easier to promulgate and compile sources. It would have been even easier had the Christians not been heavily persecuted by the Roman Empire in the late 1st century. Josephus was not a Flavian. He wrote for the Flavians. He was adopted by the Flavians only because he had predicted Vespasian would become the new emperor. Yep, Harry, that sounds like something King Charles III would do. Yeah. We know stop fight, and in the future, USA start trading military weapon, and the terrorism goes all the money for attack. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We will see. Holden, that's not I'm not a religious scholar. I'm a historian. I've talked about religion here on the channel because of its impact on history, so I'm not, and that doesn't matter to me. Scotland still spends 8% over budget and still needs to receive over £6 billion in a grant so they don't go bankrupt. So maybe you should just cut them loose at that point. India think USA is with us like Russia, France, Israel, but when we realize USA is a mastermind. I mean, India is generally supported by the United States. The general consensus in the Western world was to support India over Pakistan. Who has the most oil in the world? I think the United States actually has the most oil generally in the world. So Nubs, I don't agree, but I appreciate where you're coming from, and your desire to look for evidence is fascinating and an extremely important part of history, so thank you so much. Well, AFG, hopefully your friend is some model or something if he looks like me. No Step on Snake, great to see you. Adopted by the Flavians, he was not a Roman. He was a Jewish general who risked his life and basically predicted that Vespasian would become the Roman emperor, or that he became a patron of them. This form of adoption was very common in the Roman Empire. It's not adoption in the way that it is nowadays. The Trojan horse of America is Lady Liberty. Interesting observation, Raphael. I will slow down, Ishnat. Yeah, Nubs, that's partly true, but when there's a general consensus and there's multiple sources saying something, it's probably true, even in the ancient world. Basically, by your standards, nothing in ancient history, and nothing until really, really recently, when you have a printing press, being able to print a large number of ideas and content is real or provable. I'm doing a Q&A, no step, because I just finished my lecture on the Protestant Reformation. What do you think of Marx and historical materialism? Good question, Cosmic. Basically, Karl Marx looked at history as a continual series of struggles in a dialectic. So dialectic materialism, there is nothing spiritual. It is all material, and it is all a continual fight in the material world, in tension and conflict between different classes, one oppressing the other. The feudal system is replaced by the capitalist system, which will be replaced by the socialist system. Yes, I do know about astrology and zodiac signs. I am a Taurus. I don't share much about my personality. So people, if you're guessing my religion or guessing my age or guessing where I'm living from, I'm not going to specifically tell you. I gave my topic on the Protestant Reformation and its impact on the world. So go back and check that out when you have time. Right now, I'm just answering questions about history and social studies and the like. And everybody wants to ask me about religion for once. So, that's awesome. So your birthday either just passed or is coming up. Yes, he was pro-Roman. There's no doubt he was pro-Roman, but he was kind of forced to be pro-Roman. It was either be pro-Roman or be destroyed in the Jewish revolt. I'm not arguing with that. It is, Somi, that is true. It was inspired by the ancient Greeks, as was much of American architecture. Look at the Capitol building, look at the White House. They're clearly inspired by ancient Greek architecture because when these buildings were built, neoclassicalism, as it was called, is extremely important. Look at Mount Vernon, where Washington lived, and Monticello, where Jefferson lived, for more examples of this. Why is New Jersey known as the armpit of America? A lot of people in the United States make fun of New Jersey because it's crowding. Other problems, there's a lot of industrial centers in New Jersey, and a lot of people don't make Jersey the butt of jokes like it's not a great place to live. For those of you who are joining us from New Jersey, just know that we love you here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Give you information on Islam. So you're gonna want to watch my long form video where I explain the history and the rise of Islam. Basically, Islam comes out of the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, supposedly following the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. And again, by the way, just a note that Nubs might find interesting, I sent that Muhammad, Buddha, and Jesus lived. The impact of these history is all about ideas, doesn't seem like it just originated out of thin air without a proper founder. They probably came from a direct source. So for the sake of, although arguments could be made that all three of them don't exist, and in a sliding scale, it might be easier to argue Buddha didn't exist than Jesus, but I believe all three of those figures exist, and I don't even think it's a big argument. But anyways, so under the leadership of Muhammad, he conquers Mecca, his home city, forcing them to become Muslim, and then spreads it throughout the Arabian Peninsula. After his death, for a century, Islam spreads, conquering most of the Middle East and North Africa, as well as Spain, through conquest and conversion and everything, and creates a very strong empire known as a caliphate, an Islamic state led by a caliph, a follower of Muhammad, a successor to him. And then in 732, they are finally defeated and go backwards. And thank you, No Step on Snake, for doing that. That's very nice of you. Make sure to join and become a member, just like No Step on Snake. Yes. And yes, subscribe. So, what was I going to say? Hello, D3, great to see you. Protestants are nothing but crypto Jews and Muslims. I wouldn't say that quite fully, but yes, hopefully AFG, I gave you some history about Islam. Did you make sure to tell the truth with Protestants and their origins? Yes, I did on a previous live stream lecture, but I would not say Protestantism is Jewish and Muslim. It started by Martin Luther in the 16th century. Yeah, these questions are interesting. I'm doing some history, Lohar. What are you up to? What is the greatest historical what if? Great question, Cosmic. Basically, the greatest historical what if is, for me, as an American, what if Lincoln had lived? He probably would have figured out the whole issue of civil rights would have been a lot easier to obtain. Racial harmony would have been a lot easier to obtain. We wouldn't have a huge number of the problems that we do now. So let me see here. Although Labour has won every election in the Welsh Parliament, but they have recently dropped a third in the polls, doesn't look good for Labour. Labour is in decline throughout the UK. Protestants are nothing but crypto Jews and Muslims. Again, don't agree. Well, the Scottish National Party has won every election in the Scottish Parliament and is second in the polls and look like they will be out of government at the next election. The Reform Party is on the rise in the UK. That's quite fascinating to me. Oh, SM, great to see you again. No forces allowed in conversion. Do you really want to go there? I'm not saying that is the only way that Islam has spread. Trade and cultural exchange allowed West Africa to become Muslim. The wealthiest man who ever lived was a strong, devoted Muslim named Mansa Musa, the king of the emperor of Mali. So yes, I don't fully disagree with you, SM, but I wouldn't say it's always forced convert. It's always voluntary conversion. The same with Christianity, by the way. Then why are they buried if they were inspired by ancient architecture? What do you mean, why are they buried if they were? Thanks, Saul. I appreciate that. That's nice of you. Thank you. No Step. Hey, anyone who shared their Insta ID for talking, I need a phone. Okay, Prince, you should follow our Instagram. Let me see here. I would definitely agree that the message is synonymous. Was Frederick the Great gay? I've heard that rumor before. I don't think he was. I'm not sure. He might have been bisexual. The writings about Muhammad are too crazy not to be true. He proved his own false prophet status by what he died. He died feeling like his aorta cut, and Allah said he'll cut the aorta of a false prophet. He also, again, that's hadith. I don't know how much of that is directly true. Just like I say all the time, I don't know how much of the Gospels is directly true. I say the same thing as a historian about that. And the Reform UK are basically Donald Trump nut jobs and have no plan for government and have no idea what they're doing. And yet they're popular, which says a lot about our societies, doesn't it, Harry? What about the European conquest? The European conquest of what, Nubs? What have you predicted from your knowledge of history? Ooh, that's a great question, Steve. My prediction for the 21st century, as requested by my wonderful subscriber, Hartsonet, and moderator. By the way, show some love to the moderators. Harry's done such a good job here in the chat, as usual. But basically, I predicted that the United States will become more isolationist. The world will become, there is a libertarian trend in the world that's becoming more and more politically powerful, and the right will ascend in Europe over the next 10 years. Well, Africa becomes wealthier and more infrastructure is built up, mainly through their new partner, the Chinese. These aren't radical predictions. They're pretty obvious to look at. The greatest historical what if the Ottomans didn't block European trade in the Mediterranean Sea? Then colonialism would have delayed so much. Perhaps no Spanish, Portuguese, America. Perhaps, but they were able to trade with them. The Venetians were trading with them. So I don't know how much that is. It's more of the resentment of Islam. Or what about the Muslim nation where Christian, Jews, and Muslims lived in peace during the Dark Ages right there in Spain? That's true. Al-Andalus was part of the Muslim Golden Age, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Almoravids, the Moors, who were eventually defeated by the Reconquista. Yes, Jews in the Middle Ages lived off better, like Maimonides said, in Islamic areas than they did in Christian areas. It's now the opposite, though. Yeah, I don't know if Nigel Farage wants to be prime minister. I think he just wants attention. Yep, it's interesting, Somapa. That's a great one. I don't know if it's really fully, the premise of it is correct, though. Yeah, labor has had its problems, though, to be sure. What do you think about Ottoman sultans had their young boys? Is that true? Because it's ironic they blame West for not being more. Well, yes, that was partially true. Just like anyone in power in any political position can abuse it and abuse those around them for their own personal appetites. It's definitely true of some Ottoman sultans, not all of them, though. What was much more systematically common in the Ottoman Empire was the Janissary system, where they would take Christian boys, basically put them in slavery. Sometimes they were given the boys by families who wanted to increase their sons' lots in the world. Daughters were taken and put in harems, by the way, but these sons would be castrated and made eunuchs. Some would become advisors. Many would fight in the elite fighting corps of the Janissaries, fighting against Christian cousins in other parts of Europe for time to come. And many of them were converted for one reason or another. AFD was banned. How is that democratic? The AFD was banned in Germany? Wow, that's not good. Why did Alexander the Great not run if he had over half of Europe on his side? He didn't have half of Europe. His soldiers got tired in India and made him turn back, and that's when he died. He wanted to keep going. He probably would have made it all the way to challenge the Shang dynasty in China. He was already challenging the Chandragupta Empire in India, so who knows what would have happened to him. But he was in Afghanistan and India, and his troops demanded he turn around. So no step on snake. Excellent question there. I have a full-length video on Alexander the Great and his legacy. Obviously, one of those people that I want to meet one day. Bro, the what if was a continuation on a long message that I've sent before. No, I agree with some of it. I just don't think the premise that the Ottomans weren't going to allow, that's the only reason the Europeans went west, is true. I think there's other reasons too. I think the failure to conquer each other led them to want to conquer others. I don't remember what prediction I made. You want a prediction about the Middle East? It's hard right now because there's so much flux going on, but basically there will be a new cadre of strongmen running Middle Eastern areas such as Syria and Libya and parts of North Africa, like there were, basically replacements to the Husseins and Assads of the past. And thank you for watching from Finland. We have people who are here all over the world. And yes, Isabella and the Spanish kicked out the Jews, believing that they were a part of the problem. When they defeated the Emirate of Granada. I am a history teacher, but right now I'm just a historian, and you can be a friendly neighborhood historian if you like and subscribe. Trisha, there, I said it. In the end, each religion has used a form of force against other religions. Absolutely, it's a spectrum, and it changes over time. Do you think the UN is toast? I think without the United States, if the United States really goes into full isolation, isolationism, yes, the UN is toast. The UN was created by the United States, only succeeded because of the United States, and really doesn't have much power because without the United States guaranteeing that there are certain rules and regulations. It was founded by Americans for promoting American hegemony and influence after the third, what you call the Second World War in 1945. Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who wrote the UN Declaration of Charter of Human Rights. I mean, she's the First Lady of the United States, and then she does that. Pretty much an American organization enterprise that has obviously done a lot of good for the world, often acting in contradiction to the United States. Yeah. Also, I've read somewhere that janissaries had gay relations, because they weren't let to marry. Sultan's personal things may be personal, as you said, but this is systematic. I don't know how systematic that was, and if it was, so what? There have been gay people and gay people acting out their sexuality for all of human history, and that has nothing to do. That's not necessarily a systematic problem. It is interesting that it contradicts the morals of Islam, but it happened in Western Europe, of Christianity. It happens in many different societies that have opposed same-sex relationships. How long is you think industrial society chugs along until energy demands cannot be met to sustain? I don't know. It depends on how fast renewable energy will become buoyant enough to support it. Nuclear power is obviously on the rise, and interest in nuclear power is on the rise. There is some evidence that oil and petroleum may be a renewable resource. There may be ways for the earth to continue to create it. But renewable energies, green energies, have to get to be a certain level of potency for them to for that to countermand the loss of oil. Have you heard of Jenna Tolls? No. Oh, funny. That's hilarious. Just absolutely hilarious. Have you heard about the theory that we live in a society with too many people in high educational systems, while the lower class is getting poorer, causing politics to splinter into small factions? Yes, and that's happening. That's happening in Britain. Britain has usually been a two-party system, but is now becoming a four-party system. Yeah, I think there might be some truth to that, the Nothing Killer. No, small pipe, I see what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think you're right on the money about a lot, and I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives. Because anytime anyone has a proposal, one of the five powers and permanent members will just veto it. Yes, and this was a huge thing during the Cold War. Four groups wanted it, the Soviet Union did not, or the US did not. Let me see here. Alexander lost. He did lose. It was rare for him to lose, but it wasn't just that he lost, it's that his troops refused to keep going. Yes, that's true. Have you heard of the, yeah, that's hilarious. Again, just no. And why are you screaming when you do that? Am I single? Again, I don't, you're a pretty rich woman. That's hilarious. And I'm the King of Spain. And make sure to follow us on Patreon. Thank you for no step. I need only, okay. But the U.S. has already made it clear it doesn't care what the UN thinks if it goes against the U.S. anyway. Yes, that sounds like an American thing. Create an institution and then criticize it for turning against you, and then not care what it does. Would you rather have teeth? Yeah, please clap. I don't think I'm good just the way it is right now. And we are 10 minutes over. Wow. So I'm catching up. No such thing as renewable energy. That's not true. Nuclear power, wind turbines, those are renewable. And save the gap. Rodolfo's here as well. Fortunately, thanks to you guys, I've finally, well, not fully thanks to you guys, but I've got my Invisaligns going, so I'm going to get that gap taken care of. No one has made any comments about my gap recently, so I appreciate that. Continuing on the last message, a large number of high-educated people in combi with a power getting lower class has historically been an indicator of large conflicts and divisions. Yes, there is some sort of societal push and pull factor there. The more a society becomes educated, it's actually the educated class, mainly of privileged middle and upper class people, who tend to want to create some sort of wide-reaching social reform. The vast majority of the Russian revolutionaries were wealthy and powerful. Wasn't ancient Greece very gay, like it was fine to be openly gay, or at least not criminal? There are different tiers to that. Obviously, heterosexual relationships were encouraged in ancient Greece, more so in ancient Rome, but obviously gay relationships were seen as common. Lesbianism was quite common. You have Lesbos. The term lesbian comes from ancient Greece, the island of Lesbos, part of the Delian League or the Athenian Empire that's known during the Peloponnesian War in the 5th century BC. You have you have pottery and all sorts of artistic depictions of homosexual activity. You have relationships between older men and young boys, which does sound quite awful and is quite awful in many ways. But when you understand that in the ancient world, it was quite common for older men to be with very young women, and up until recently it was common, and it was also common for that to be the case in same-sex relationships. It's awful and horrible, but wasn't uncommon back then. Would you recommend a UN overhaul or just get rid of some parts of it? I don't know exactly. I don't know enough about it. I think that there needs to be some changes. The UN was built as the Cold War supranational organization. The Cold War has been over for 30 years, so obviously things can be changed. Nixon did not order the recording, but did cover them up. If he came clean about what happened, would he have remained in office? Yes, Richard Nixon was a successful enough and popular enough president to have remained in office, even if he had just said, hey, we did this break-in, and it wasn't the right thing to do. Yes, Harry, you are right. Alexander the Great himself was bisexual. So it's not even homosexuality, it's bisexuality that's very common. Britain, the Netherlands, Belgium, high intellectual people with their own ideas, while the lower class is getting easier to manipulate out of desperation. This happened before the Great Wars too. Media is making it more common and the predilections much more easy, but people have been highly manipulated by their governments throughout all of human history. Yeah. What is my perspective on capitalism? Capitalism is obviously the economic system that relies on money market economics. It is called capitalism only by its enemies originally. Every political and economic system, every government relies on a capitalistic system to one extreme or another because you need money in order for your economy to function. We are not barterers anymore. I would love to be on Joe Rogan if he's watching this. I don't think he is, though. He's very busy. We are not becoming a four-party system. The Conservative Party is going down the drain. Reform UK will collapse as soon as it finishes its first term in government. That's a very bold prediction. I will hold you to that when it's over, but you are becoming a four-party system. And I have talked about this before with Harry and with a lot of you. The left-wing parties, European politics is far more liberal and left-wing than American politics. The conservative parties in Britain and Germany and other places, or France, tend to be, have tended to be in the past, a little to the right of the Democrats in the United States. So a center-left party, or center-right somewhat. Whereas the Labor parties have been more to the left than the Democrats in the United States. The conservative parties have been more to the left than the Republicans in the United States, the Republicans being one of the most conservative parties in all world politics. That's changing, however, because there's been a predominance of where it seems as though there's a very strong left-wing, pro-socialistic political party in areas like Germany, France, the UK, and Canada. And the conservative alternative is just a more moderated form of that without socialistic tendencies. Stronger right-wing, nativist, anti-migrant, populist fronts have risen, like the National Front in France, the AfD in Germany, the Reform Party in the UK, and yes, some would argue Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Those movements are strong reactions to the to liberal government in the rest of to what they consider to be a right that is unable to help them and a left that is socialistic. So that's true. But the liberal Democrats have decreased in power. So when you got 10 to 15%, you might need a coalition government because that's a lot of people and will prevent a plurality. I'm in the United States. I don't say exactly where I am, Prince. Have you ever taken some interest in Dutch history? You should go back and watch my last live stream lecture. I love the Dutch. Yeah, they do cost more to maintain, but that doesn't mean they don't renew energy. What's the best era of music in your opinion? Oh, I'm an old hat in many ways. I love classical music. I love the 1800s when it comes to music. I love classical music when it comes to different things. And Harry's put a stamp on the chat. I'm sorry that I didn't get to all of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Harry, for doing that. I appreciate that. We're at 77 minutes. We went 17 minutes over and a half-hour Q&A on top of a lecture. I hope you really enjoyed this. If you did, like and subscribe. Consider becoming a member and donating and helping this channel grow as we continue to do things. Check out those long-form videos on Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, if you want to become a friendly neighborhood historian, all you have to do is like and subscribe. We will see you again Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Q&A, our part one. Saturday, 6 p.m., same thing. And then next Sunday, 4 p.m., we'll be doing a live stream lecture. We'll figure out what topic we are doing there. But thank you, Harry and Rodolfo, and Hars for holding down the chat. Thank you, Harsonet, for the topic. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and all the new friends we got to see today. A lot of you I haven't seen before. And whether we agree or disagree or whether you like what I said or not, please consider coming back and enjoying the history and the good vibes that we have here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Take care. Have a great week. And remember, love history.